Hi, heroes. This is Stan Lee, but that's no excuse. This is a very special occasion for me because I'm here with a very special guest, a writer whom I've known and admired for many, at least his work I've admired, for many, many years. In fact, many people have admired his work because during the years that he's written the X-Men, he's made it one of the biggest selling comic books of all time. And that's for a long, long period of time. Of course, Chris Claremont has also written many other books, done many other things, but I guess he's best known for the work he's done on the X-Men. And now, without any further ado, I want you all to meet Chris Claremont.
Hi, Stan.
Glad to have you here, Chris.
My pleasure.
And first of all, I think the reason that we're doing this is because so many people have read your stories for such a long period of time, have been so impressed with them, and they'd like to know more about you. The thing about comics that's become so great is the fact that years ago, and when I say years ago, I mean decades ago, the artists and writers were pretty anonymous. Mm-hmm. But starting, I guess, in the 60s, when Marvel started putting the credits down for each writer and each artist and letter and inker, and the people who created comics began to accumulate fans. And the fans really do care. They care about the stories, they care about the artists, the writers, the editors. And as I say, we have one of the top writers in the comic book business here, so we want to really know a lot about you, more than just the stories you've written, Chris. So to begin with, I'll ask the question that I guess everybody has asked you at the comic book conventions. How did you get started as a comic book writer?
Well, foolishly, you hired me.
We all make mistakes.
I know. I was in college back in what seems like the dawn of time, but it was actually only 1968. And every year, the college shut down for 2 months in January and February and sent its students out on what they called a field period, which is that you were supposed to go out and get a job in your major field. And my major field at the time was acting and political theory, and there wasn't too much in the acting gig that winter in New York, and there was certainly not much in the political theory gig, especially if you weren't a Republican. So I figured I would get a job at Mad Magazine, since my parents knew an artist at Mad Magazine, Al Jaffe. And I thought, they go on all these great trips, and I really thought this would go to Morocco or Egypt or Moscow, or it'd be a lot of fun.
Their annual jaunt.
Yeah,
right?
I thought it would be a great idea. I mean, I'm 18. It would be fun. Uh-huh. Unfortunately, we discovered that MAD doesn't have an office staff, and they really don't need a young punk flunky who's only along for the ride. However, Al said he knew this person at Marvel Comics, and would I be interested in going there and working for a couple of months? And I said, hey, this is no problem. I like Marvel Comics. I love Marvel Comics. And that person turned out to be you. Al called you. The next thing I know, I get a call from Saul Brodsky, who ran the Marvel offices at that time. And he said, would you like to work for us? You know, I understand you'd like to work for us on a sort of like a gopher basis. The idea, you go for coffee, you go for this, you go for that. And I said, sure. He said, well, we can't pay you very much. We can't pay you at all.
We tell everybody that.
Yeah, well, little did I know. And I said, hey, no problem. I'll work for free.
Couldn't pass up a deal like that.
Well, there was this long silence, and I thought, hello, is anyone there? Oh, sorry, I didn't, he wasn't used to someone being so forthcoming about being cheap. And they said, you're hired. He said, I was hired. And I went in the next Monday, and there I was in a suit and a tie, and I wanted to look respectable, and my first day on the job, and I walk in the office. And Marvel in those days, as you recall, was not Marvel today. It was basically 3 closets on Madison Avenue.
One of them was my office.
It had the only door. And I walk in, and there's this little reception area with this incredibly awful, sort of dark green modular couch.
You
little coffee table.
You remember that?
Yeah.
That was a million years ago.
Exactly, that's the point.
Must have made some impression.
Oh, it was a great couch, you know. And a little cubicle, which was where, I guess the secretary sat, and then I ended up sitting. And then there was the bullpen, where at the time it was John Romita, Frank Giacoia, Herb Trimpe, and Marie Severin. And across the hall was the stat room, which in those days was Tony Mortellaro, and I think even then Stu Schwartzberg.
Some people may not know what a stat is.
Well, actually, a photostat, visual aids.
They've since evolved into Xerox copies today, but before we had Xeroxes,
We made
we had
photostats.
these big, cumbersome photostat machines that were the size of a room. But they were pretty good. You had nice, glossy copies. Anyway, go ahead.
And, well, the way basically you make a comic book is you have the original art, which is at this size, and you photostat it. Actually, it's shot down to the size of a printed comic book, and that's what the coloring is done on.
You mean you reduce the original size to, what is it, 8 by 11
Yeah,
or something?
just about 8 by 11.
And then these glossy photostats, the colorers use what they call aniline dyes, and they color the photostat, and the colored photostat is sent to the engraver, who uses that as a color guide and makes whatever engravers make to color the book.
So I'm standing there, and then at the end of the hall were two offices, yours on the right, and Roy Thomas, who was assistant editor in those days, and Saul and their secretary on the left. So I'm standing there, and and suddenly this huge man, which is John Verporten, who was the production manager, comes lumbering down the hall, and it's sort of like a cross between King Kong and Godzilla. I'm standing there, and it's like the scene in Kindergarten Cop, where I'm just sitting there kind of going, "Hi, what do you want?" "Well, I'm here for a job." "We don't have jobs." No, I have an appointment." "Oh, you're the new kid." "Yeah, okay." And the next thing I knew, I was sitting at a desk and answering fan mail. And that was, that was where it got started.
Did you answer the fan mail as well and as efficiently and carefully as we would have wanted? That was very important.
No, I think I amazed everybody. I did it all, the entire 2 months backlog in one day, and they thought, my God, this kid is just too much to be, it's too good to be true. Let's keep him around for a couple of weeks. So
we were one company that our policy was always, as much as possible, to try to answer every fan letter. Always wanted these writers to get a reply from us, not just a form letter. And little did they dream they were getting a reply from Chris Claremont himself. Although knowing you probably signed your name.
No, actually, one of the things that happened was, one of the last things I did was I ended up rejecting the submission of a gentleman named Tony Isabella, who, when I came back to work full-time for Marvel 5 years later, was my boss.
That's funny.
And he never tired of reminding me that I had rejected his first submission, and he could now fire me on a whim.
Well, how did you get to do writing? There you were answering fan mail. Was it because we liked the way you answered the mail so much?
No, actually...
I really know the answer. You see, I'm asking these things so you can tell the people why. I know the answer.
A rhetorical question.
Oh,
my goodness gracious. Basically, it was, you said, at the time, we did annuals, which were sort of like large format compilations in those days of the best of earlier issues of various series, plus fact pages about the characters, telling you a little more about who everybody was and what they are and who, what, where, when, and why. In this instance, I was doing a Sergeant Fury. We were putting together a Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos annual. And they needed a couple of pages. Nazis I have known and loved, women I have killed, or maybe the other way around. Great tanks of World War II. And so I did the copy for it. And I got paid like $12 a page. And I thought, wow, this is fun. This is easy. Maybe I should try this more often. So when I went back to school, I started submitting plots, synopses. And I got...
When you went back to school? You mean
to
that
college.
had been a temporary job?
Yeah.
And you went back to college? So from college, you started sending us synopses.
Right.
Notice how I have this ability to clarify things and make them so cohesive. And go ahead.
Well, actually, that's a perfect exemplar of the writer-editor relationship. The writer comes up with all of these hopefully interesting concepts, and the editor reaches in and grabs out the one essential element, which is actually what it's all about. Went back to school. I finished college. I submitted stuff. I got a whole raft of very nice but very emphatic rejection slips from various companies.
But beautifully written.
Oh, the Marvel ones, certainly. The DC just lost them. I sent stuff to Dick Giordano, and they lost an entire pack of submissions, and I got...
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
so who knows? I might have ended up working there. Got out of college, went to work in New York as an actor for a while, and about the spring of 1974, Marv Wolfman, who was then editor of Marvel's Black and White line, needed an assistant. So I needed a job. They hired me for part-time, 2.5 days a week. And in that way that Marvel is so good at, the 2.5 days a week were the 2.5 days when nothing happened. No matter what 2.5 days, if it was Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, nothing happened. I was sitting there at my desk kind of going do-de-do-de-do-de-do, collecting a paycheck. And people would come by and say, Chris, don't you have anything to do? No. Want to give me something to do? We don't have anything for you to do. Then I won't do anything. So they thought, well, we could either fire the fool or make him full-time, on the assumption that sooner or later work will come in. They'll have to get their money, their value out. It's like if they fired me, they'd sacrifice the 5 weeks they'd already paid me.
That's
so
real top-level thinking.
That's Marvel management all the way. So they basically said, we'll make the fool full-time.
We've never been known as great business people.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if I'd been fired, who knows where the industry would have been.
No, we weren't so dumb. We kept you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I ended up working as Marv's assistant for the spring and summer. And then in August of '74, when I was out in California doing articles for Planet of the Apes, Roy Thomas retired as editor-in-chief. Len Wein took over, and I moved up the ladder to become his associate editor. So Len and I essentially put out the entire Color Comics line until Len left as editor-in-chief. Marv came in. And then in 1976, I went freelance. Along the way, Len very kindly passed on to me this series that he had created with Dave Cockrum about a bunch of mutants. It was sort of like a restart of an old series that you and Jack had done that had not fared as successfully as everyone had hoped the first time out of the box. So he thought, well, let's give it another shot. And that's where the X-Men came from.
Son of a gun.
And the rest, as they say, is a lot of fun.
And what year was that you started doing the X-Men?
Somewhere around the end of '74, beginning of '75.
I would say, wow.
Yes.
It seems to me that the one unique thing about the X-Men, or I should say about your version of the X-Men, it was one of the first times in comics that I can think of when the characterization became almost the most important part of the story, where I think what you succeeded in doing so beautifully, and I've always admired it, when Jack and I started the X-Men, there were only about 5 or 6 X-Men, and there were a few villains who were also mutants, and we played around with them. But you kept adding to the group until there were so many of these mutants that I don't even know. Everybody lost count, but you somehow gave each one of them a personality and a character that they became real fleshed out people, and the readers cared about them. And I used to think that some of your stories, even if there were no action scenes at all or fight scenes, they were incredibly gripping just because you had this ability to write real drama and real situations with characters that were fantastic powers, but you made them seem as realistic as any stories could be. And I think that that's really a great tribute to your ability.
Well, thank you very much.
How do you follow a remark like that?
Really? Well, actually, I'll see you and raise you a level, because in all I was really doing is following the path established by, as a writer, by you, in the sense that one of the most memorable issues of the Fantastic Four, which they actually just reprinted in the new Abrams book, The History of Marvel Comics, is This Man, This Monster, which is not a punch-out book. It's an issue of the Fantastic Four where this guy takes the place of the Thing, one of the characters, believing that he will get his revenge on Reed Richards, for the head of the Fantastic Four, for some imagined slight. And in the course of the story discovers that he was totally wrong about them, and that what he thought that his actions were not only based on a misconception, but were totally wrong. And in the end ends up sacrificing himself to save Reed, because it's the only way in his own mind that he can balance the scales, because he has committed an unpardonable crime. There's no violence in it, no punch is thrown, nothing. It's all character, it's all emotion, it's all the relationships of the characters, and it's a really strong, powerful, moving story. So I think when you say that the X-Men is this, this, and this, yes, it is, but it's because it's evolving out of from groundwork that was laid during your tenure on the books?
Well, I guess that every writer probably, and every artist, whatever he or she does is probably based on something that has been done before. You're influenced by everything you've seen and read. However, it was nice of you to say that. You know, it's a funny thing talking to somebody like you, Chris. I'm supposed to be sitting here thinking of clever questions to ask you, and I find I get so interested in what you're saying that instead of thinking of the next question, I'm just listening to you, and then when you stop talking, suddenly I don't know what. And incidentally, I hope people don't think that when we sit and talk, normally we're always sitting at a table like this with our arms folded, you know, at this distance away.
Well, no.
Sometimes we sit in chairs in a room. Sometimes we have a Coke or something.
Well, the fun. I mean, when I was working on staff, I was the first editor of a book called Monster of the Movies, which was Marvel's version of the old Warren book, Famous Monsters of Filmland.
Yeah.
And I put together my first issue, and I was proud of it. I had edited an issue of a comic. This is not a comic, but a magazine. It was something I could hold up and say, yes, I'm a respectable professional in the magazine community. And I walked, you know, I came in one day and a memo was waiting on my desk saying, Claremont, in my office, now, Stan. Whoops. Walked in and, you know, threw the book down and said, this is the worst piece of dreck I have ever read. What kind of idiot could you have been to publish this? And I'm going, oh, geez, I'm dead. What's your problem, Stan? And the thing was, as you were explaining all this, what I was doing wrong, it's like you're bouncing around the room saying blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting there, and then I'm getting up and bouncing around the room saying, well, I did this, and this, you know, this is why I did this. When you get people talking about their work, especially writers in comics, what you seem to tap into is this born-again actor. You know, it's like, we really want to be on the stage, but we can't do that, so we're going to do it all in our offices. And you walk around Marvel, in the old days it used to, and to an extent now even, and you'll suddenly see a writer and an editor in conference, and the writer will be jumping around the room going, and then someone says this, and Spider-Man swings this way through here, and then you know, and then his face stretches in 5 different directions. It's almost like publishing as performance art. So, yes, we're being very sedate and responsible and mature and professional sitting here and...
Well, we have to do that. But did I really yell at... What was wrong with the book? What didn't I like about it? I don't remember this at all.
Too much text, too small pictures, the jokes weren't funny. And I was saying, no, actually it was one of the best...
Jokes are supposed to be funny. I've been trying to tell you that for I don't know how many years.
I'm legendary in this business for having no sense of humor. That's why I write 2 humor books. The thing... It was basically that what it came down to is, in your view as editor-in-chief, it didn't work. In my view as the editor, this is why I did it. And what you were doing was saying, why did you do these things? And I was saying, well, this is why. And then it was a case of...
Who won? How did it turn out?
Oh, geez, I
You probably ended up yelling at me, as I recall those things.
I have a sneaking suspicion the person who signed the paycheck had the advantage. But it was an invaluable learning experience because I was sitting there discovering not simply that I could defend my decisions, but that I could see where I'd made mistakes, and that you were looking on it not that I was, you know, some kid who'd screwed up, but eventually as, you know, okay, this is wrong, we do it from here, you know, fix it the next issue. So it sort of allowed, it gave me a certain confidence in my own ability to A, screw up and survive, but also to justify, and it gave me faith in my own judgment, which you need either, you know, which you need as an editor, but which you almost certainly need as a writer.
Anybody can tell, listening to you, looking at you, Chris is one of the most articulate guys in the business, one of the most intelligent, and I am one of the luckiest people because for most of my career, which seems to have extended for centuries, I've been lucky enough to be working with, I guess, the most talented artists and writers that have been available. And I've got to tell you, it has never felt like work. You know, even the arguments that we may have had, you were always arguing with an equal, with a peer, with someone who knew as much as you, very often more than you. Very often in an argument, you know, one of us will back down or one of us will say, gee, you're right, I hadn't thought of it that way. And I think that's one of the things I've always loved about the business. there was always that mutual respect amongst the people working in it. But now, I think probably that what a lot of people looking in on this would like to know specifically is, because certainly it's the main thing about you, how do you actually write a story? When you're doing an X-Men or whatever it is, what is the process? But before you do that, see, I've learned this dramatically, because I too used to act years ago. You wouldn't know it by seeing how hammy I am. But we're going to save that for the end to make sure people keep watching. And first, I want to ask you one thing. Weren't you born in England?
Yes.
And are you English now or an American citizen?
No, I'm an American citizen.
Oh, so you're not a British subject.
I'm dual.
You have a dual citizenship? See, not your ordinary guy. Now, how about another thing? You fly your own airplane?
No, my mother flies my airplane.
Your mother flies your airplane?
Of course. I mean, you know,
But
it allows you, you know, it's like, well, how did you get up here, Chris? Oh, my mom drove me. Your mom drove you?
I think that's
in my
great.
plane.
Yeah. But you have a pilot's license, don't you?
No.
Oh, you don't?
No.
You mean if your mom is busy, that plane doesn't get used?
Right.
So I didn't know that. I thought you flew too.
No, I haven't had time.
But it's
to
your
learn.
plane?
Yeah.
What kind of plane is it?
It's a Bonanza, an A36.
Wow. Doesn't Herb Trimpe have a plane also? He's another one of our artists.
He has a Stearman acrobatic biplane.
Yeah. You know, you could look up in the skies at almost any time, and there's some Marvel guy flying above you.
Well, actually, there's a new book out from a rival company that shall remain nameless called War Idol by an artist named George Pratt. And it's the adventures of enemy ace Hans von Hammer. And it's all biplanes, World War I, zooming and booming and zooming around.
That's a
the
DC
skies.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. You can say that.
Oh, well. And the thing is that George knows Herb. And for reference, he went up to Rhinebeck, upstate New York, where Herb lives, and Herb took him for a couple of flights and showed him all the maneuvers that he put into the book. And then, you know, they landed and cleaned up the cockpit after, George had, oops. And it allowed George to put together the actual aerial combat scenes in the book much more eloquently than he felt he could have otherwise.
Wow.
It's a lot of fun. I mean, flying is neat. Flying in the front of the plane is more fun than flying in the back because at least you know what's going on.
I have 15 minutes flying time to my credit. I have a log book. During World War II, I knew somebody who was a member of the Civilian Air Patrol, took me up in the air and gave me, when we were up there, said, would you like to fly the plane? I said, you're kidding. He said, no, just take the joystick, either go that way to go down, or this way to go up, or this way left or right. And that was easy, as long as I didn't have to land. Landed the plane for me, gave me the logbook, and then I took a good look at the plane, which I hadn't looked at earlier. It was a Piper Cub. And it was held together by Scotch tape, glue, little things tied up. I said, is this what I entrusted my life to? I never went up in a private plane again, but now we're going to get to the heavy stuff.
Well, actually, no. One last story.
All right.
A friend of my mother's is a retired aerospace engineer. Worked on the lunar module project, and he's heavily into what are called ultralights, which are basically hang gliders with engines.
Oh, sure, I know them. Yeah.
So they have dual-seater ultralights. So you go out there and you sit down, and you're sitting basically in. It's not even Scotch tape and baling wire. You are in a framework with a gossamer wing over your head, and essentially a lawnmower engine behind your back. And the guy starts it up, and you're airborne. And you're sitting there, and you're looking down between your legs, and there's nothing between you and the ground but eventually 2,000 feet of empty space. And you're thinking, aha! Because you have a seatbelt, you have a glider, you have a little engine, and that's it.
Oh, boy.
And so
That must be some feeling.
it's actually, it's really fascinating because in that, when you fly in an airliner, you don't feel so much of the air that you're moving through unless you hit some really serious
right.
bumps.
That's right.
In an ultralight, you know every little eddy, every little current, every little piece of chop. So you're totally aware of your environment.
You are as one with the air.
The only difference is you're also aware of how far it is to the ground and how eager your friend Mr. Gravity is to have its wicked way with you. So it's both an incredible amount of fun, but also a very humbling experience because you're sitting there and you're thinking, I could really be intensely scared right now if it wouldn't kill me.
I find all of life is a humbling experience. You know, we ought to give you an airplane book to do, something to do with air. Oh, speaking of books, let's find out now the thing that we've all been waiting for.
How to create a comic book?
How do you actually go about it? Here, you've got an issue of a comic book to do. You pick whatever book it is, and you've got a deadline. You've got to have the story done. What is your process? How do you do it?
Well, you figure out what the story is, first of all. I mean, one of the advantages of series comics is that 9 times out of 10 the story spins off of the issue before. So you have a certain momentum, a certain rhythm going on. Each month, every 3-4 weeks, you have to come up with an idea. The ideas and the characterization flow out of what has gone before. You're not starting from a standing start. So you think, well, what's going on here? In my case, I try and find a certain dynamic visual image. Because the thing is, the one place where a lot of people misunderstand the relationship is they think writing in comics is writing, the words. And when I talk to people who want to be writers, when I'm doing workshops, I try to explain to them, no. The art of writing in comics is the art of telling the story. Not so much to the reader, but to the artist. Because what you're doing is creating a sequence of images that you can give, in my case, to Jim Lee.
Hold it a minute. I think it's important to explain. When you say it's communicating to the story to the artist, it's important to say that we don't do a complete script the way a screenwriter does. You might mention how we do that, and then I think it'll be clearer.
Okay. There are generally speaking two ways to construct a comic book script. One is what we call in the industry the full script, which is most akin to a movie screenplay, where you break down, say a 22-page comic is 100 still images scattered over 22 pages, panels. What you do is, on your full script, you describe the action in each panel, what is happening, who the characters are, what they're doing, where they are, what time it is, if necessary, why they're doing it, and how they're doing it. You give the artist all the material that he needs to draw that panel. Then as well, you put the narrative copy and the dialogue that would go in that panel. Then you go on to the next panel, describe that, narrative copy, dialogue, and so on through the story. The other method is what is sort of called the Marvel method, but it really isn't anymore since it's sort of expanded throughout the industry, sort of like a fungus. Is the writer will generate a plot or a scenario which describes the events of the story in great detail or little detail, depending on the writer's instincts, how well he works with the artist, whatever. Gives it to the pencil artist, who then renders it in pencil, breaks it down, gives you the visual images back, at which point the writer then writes the script off of that, the narrative, copy, and dialogue, at which point it goes to a letterer who letters the copy onto the page. Then it goes to the inker, who inks the pencil art in India ink so that it can be photographed, reproduced both for the photostats that will be colored and both on the printing press itself. And that's the comic. Myself, I prefer working the plot method because it allows a lot more flexibility between the penciler and the writer. It allows for more visual, a more visually interesting story.
That you tell the artist what the story is by giving him the plot. The artist then has the option of drawing what you've told him, but interpreting it any way he wants to. You don't say to him, panel 1 should be a close-up or a long shot or a big panel or a little panel. You just say, this is what the story is. Then the artist puts in the long shots, the close-ups, the perspective shots, as he deems fit.
Well, it depends actually on the artist. For just by way of example, a number of years ago, Frank Miller, who has gone on to bigger and better things, as have we all, and I did a 4-issue series about Wolverine, which actually helped define the character and make him what he is today. Frank, for the first issue, got one of my usual full plots, which was incredibly detailed, broken down into pages. It gave elements of dialogue. It gave details of what kind of shot I wanted, how the story should structure, all this stuff. Frank then drew it the way he felt best visualized what I wanted and fit in his own visual style. The nice thing about Frank was that since at that time he was functioning as a writer, the artwork had allowances for script and for the copy, both placement and, well, for the copy, that a lot of artists don't. The thing was, by the time we got to the 4th issue, we were so simpatico in terms of our understanding of the characters, our understanding of the story, the dynamics of it. We were, totally. Basically, it was a 20-minute phone call where I said, okay, this is where we start, this is where we end. We discussed about what went in the middle.
Those
I said,
are the
do you
two
need anything?
extremes of how to do it.
And
the
I said, do you
detailed
need any
way
more?
and
And
the
Frank
easy
said,
way.
yeah, do you need any more material out of this? And Frank said, no, I got it. I said, go to town.
Okay. Let's
And he-
get back to you. Let's get back to how you come up with a story.
Basically, it's like anything else. You figure out what the story is, and then you tell it. I mean,
if
it sounds
you're-
very simple, but that's...
If you're doing a series, now you've already done issue 1, 2, 3, now you have to do issue 4.
Right.
Do you know when you start issue 1, let's say, what the whole series is going to be, or do you sort of create it as you're doing? Is there something in issue 3 that may give you an idea and that makes you go off in a different direction than you may even have anticipated?
Depends. I mean, the answer is yes to both. I sort of work to an extent on the pizza pie school of plotting, which is to say, if you have an idea, you just toss it up like a pizza, and whatever comes down you work on, but a lot of it sticks to the ceiling. So every so often,
That's good.
an idea will just drop down into your lap, and you think, oh, I forgot about that. That's interesting. And then you look back and you see where the resonances were, and you go on with that. It can be incredibly infuriating for an editor or a penciler because it allows for a lot of uncertainty. You can't look a year ahead and say, this is what the book will be. I mean, for example, Len Wein, who created the X-Men and was editor-in-chief of Marvel, and at the time wrote Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and the Hulk and Thor.
Created the second version of the
Second X-Men, the new X-Men, along with Dave Cockrum. Len loved to structure things out years in advance. He would have a plot, he would have a rough outline of each plot for the next 12 or 15 issues. He knew exactly where he was going, and that gave him a sense of structure and security. For myself, I will give myself a general direction I'm going in. If I'm building to something, I will stick that down and say, this is where I want to end up. But getting there is a much more fluid process because there's unexpected elements. One of the things about comics that a lot of people also don't understand is that it's a collaboration. It's 2 people, 3 people if you count the editor, the writer, the penciler, the editor. Even when it's the writer and the penciler are the same person, you're dealing with different sides of the brain. And what will happen is that you can set out to do a story in a perfectly straight and normal direction, and then something unexpected will happen. Case in point. A few years back, John Romita and I were doing a storyline in the X-Men, John Romita Jr., which we were going to tell Nightcrawler's origin, the origin of one of our characters. And I had the first issue all set up. It was called The Last of the Rassendils. It was going to be a spin-off of Prisoner of Zenda. And it was all this high adventure in Middle Europe. Lots of costumes, lots of really neat stuff. I wrote the first issue, or rather I wrote the first 11 pages of the first issue, and the story died. It just died. You know, I look at the page, and I had no idea what happened next. I mean, nothing that I put down on paper worked. None of the elements, none of the structures, none of the characters. And I thought, ugh, this is not good. I went and I sat down with my editor, Ann Nocenti. We talked about it. We talked about it for days. We kicked the story around the office like, you know, like a stuffed animal. Just like, work, you fool. Come on, pull yourself together. And we couldn't make it work. And we basically decided, okay, this story does not want to be told, at least in this way. Rather, even though we'd actually completed the setup issue, we said, we have to bag this. If we go on down this road, we are in for a disaster. So we threw it out and substituted a much more, what turned out to be, in my mind, a much more effective story. But the thing was that my timeline just got thrown into a totally different track there. We went off in a totally different direction and ended up running a sequence of events that eventually led to the creation of Excalibur.
Yeah.
You know, a whole new series. So you never really know what's going to work. Another element that affects a comic is the relationship between the writer and the penciler, and the characters. When Dave Cockrum and I started working on the X-Men, Dave's favorite character was Nightcrawler. So Nightcrawler got center stage all the time, or a lot of the time. He was the focal point of a lot of Dave's stories. Dave wasn't as comfortable with Wolverine, so Wolverine was in the background. We were thinking maybe he wasn't right for the X-Men, we'd write him out of the book. John Byrne came on. John loved Wolverine. It's like, you're not going to throw this character out of the book. Okay, John, no problem. Hey, you know, I really didn't want to throw him out, but, you know, if he's not working, he's not working. On the other hand, he wasn't that comfortable with Nightcrawler, so Nightcrawler sort of shifted a little more into the background. Wolverine went center stage, and that set in motion the sequence of events that have now led to 3 series and him becoming one of the key characters in the Marvel Pantheon. Different artists respond to different types of stories in different ways. Some artists will do humor better than others. Some artists will do big machines better than others. Some artists will do space opera better than intimate little character stories, whereas others will do intimate little character stories better than space opera. You find through the work process a way of playing to their strengths. You don't want to sit down and craft a story that shoves a concept down the artist's throat that the artist can't draw, unless it's absolutely essential to the storyline that you're writing. Because if the artist isn't happy drawing it, if he isn't comfortable drawing it, he's not going to do his best work, or her best work. Another story I did with an artist involved guest starring Power Pack, Louise Simonson's characters, who were a bunch of little kids. Only after we did the story did we discover the artist hates drawing little kids. So we have like this entire issue of dwarfs. You know, and it's like, oh, why didn't you tell us? Well, because
nobody asked me.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like, you know, you sent me the issue, I drew the issue. But see, if you told us you didn't like drawing kids, we would have done something. We would have changed the story. We would have found it, you know, it wasn't...
Or given it to another artist.
Or given it to another artist, I mean, who was a little more comfortable with it. So, you don't, you know, and in an even more crucial element, some artists are great doing single characters, but they can't draw groups to save their life. And the problem with a group is that you've got all these characters running around, heroes and villains. It's an exercise in choreography that is mind-boggling at its best. And others thrive on groups. So you want to find the mix of writer and penciler where everyone plays to their strengths, where they complement each other, where you can get a synergistic mix of ideas, where one person will sit there and say, well, I think that, say, the X-Men will go here and do this and this. Well, maybe. But suppose they do this and this and this. Okay, but if they do this and this and this, then they have to go here. Okay, if they go here, then can't this person go there? And you're suddenly, like, off and running, and it's like this almost live your own adventure mixed with a really world-class tennis match, because you're bouncing ideas back and forth and back and forth. One of the best moments I ever had was I was sitting in Louise Simonson's office, and Louise was probably the best editor I've ever worked with in comics and possibly in prose as well. In addition to being one of the nicest people and one of the best darn writers in the business. And we're sitting in her office kicking around ideas for this X-Men Teen Titans crossover that we were going to do with DC. And I was saying, well, I have this image, and a lot of the work that I do, a lot of the work that I am most comfortable with, that I actually think is my best work, oftentimes starts with a primal visual image. You know, and that from that grows the entire story, as opposed to, well, this is the beginning of the story, and this is the end, and this is how we get there. A lot of time, I mean, I can structure a story that way, but if there isn't that key image that sort of locks my emotion in, then I sort of, it's not as fulfilling or exciting for me as it could be. So I'm sitting in Louise's office, and I'm saying, okay, try this. You know, and I'm describing the center of the galaxy, creation, stars, Jack Kirby's starscape all over the place. Suddenly, this burst of primordial fire, you know, like the dawn of creation. And out of it emerges this creature that slowly evolves into the figure of Phoenix. And this voice says in incredibly Lucasfilm reverb, "Who summons Dark Phoenix?" And then this hand reaches out like Michelangelo's God reaching out to man on the Sistine ceiling. And the booming voice says, "I, Darkseid," who was major villain of DC at the time,
villain,
and still is. And suddenly the door pops open, and Walt Simonson, Wheezy's husband, peeks in and says in this sort of like grinning Viking face, "Darkseid? Did someone mention Darkseid?" I said, "Walt, it's great. Dark Phoenix, Darkseid, X-Men, Teen Titans, New Gods, the end of the universe as we know it." And he looked at me and said, "Sounds good to me." And we plotted the story, it's a 96-page story, 64-page story, 64-page story, over 2 nights at Wheezy's house, Wheezy and Walter's house, till like 4 in the morning each time, just sitting there, bouncing ideas back and forth. I mean, I've still got the notes. It's like pages and pages of handwritten notes. Well, could they do this and this? And, well, I want to do the wall, this scene. Okay, if we do this scene, and then I said, well, how about we end it with a concert in Central Park? The 1812 Overture. And then all this happens in the fireworks scene. And Walt's going, okay. And then we do this and this and this. And it was just this effervescent, exciting, just jazzy exchange of ideas that to me symbolizes the best of what this business is all about. Where you put 2 people together and you sort of bang them together like atoms in a nuclear explosion, and ideas pop out, and they just keep popping out. And no one's really thinking in terms of whose idea it is or who gets credit or whatever. It's just we're telling a story.
Yeah.
And we're telling a story basically to ourselves. And then you figure out a way to put it down on paper and tell it to the reader. But the key is just to have fun. Because, like it or not, this is these are pictures on paper. This is people writing modern day myths.
I think what you just said, the key is to have fun, is really the whole ball of wax, because I have found the best stories are the ones where the writer and the artist really enjoys them.
Yeah.
And no matter how we talk about it, the comic book medium is an entertainment medium, and its purpose is to entertain the reader. And I like to think one of the attractive things about Marvel Comics is we enjoy doing the stories, and I think the sense of fun that we in the bullpen have sort of communicates itself to the readers, and they sort of share that sense of fun, and it's a mutual thing. And I think you just put your finger on it, and I might add, you gave the most beautiful description, I think, and picture of the true collaboration between an artist and a writer and the way it works. Because what you said is so right on the money. It's the artist and the writer. It isn't the artist, it isn't the writer. Now, sometimes the artist is the writer, but the point is it's pictures and stories, and when they blend together perfectly, then you've got a great comic.
Well, the idea is that you craft a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. I mean, the thing is, no matter how literally an artist tries to follow your plot, it's got to change, because you're talking to a different person.
Yeah.
Even when the writer and the artist are the same person, it's different tools of the same mind. So it goes through a process of interpretation. When it comes back to the writer for the script, it gets interpreted again. So what you have is an evolutionary process where it sort of goes from, this may be where it starts, but it won't, no matter how slavishly the person tries to put themselves in your head as the writer, the artist can't give you what you have up here, because it's up here. So what you hope for, what you aim for, is something better. It'll be different, yes, but whatever that you hope that what the artist brings to it will embroider and enhance and kick it up that next level.
Also, the artist inspires you. Once you're looking at those drawings, I find it makes it so much easier to write some real pithy and meaningful copy. You know, I am so glad that you gave the explanation you gave, because so many people read a comic, look at a comic, and they just sort of imagine it just got there, you know? And I think there are people who have the perception that comics are just, oh, some guy gets together and writes a story and an artist draws it and they,
Oh, no,
you know,
it's even better. It's like, oh, and what do you do? I write comics. Oh, you do the pictures? No, I write comics. Oh. They need to be written? You know, it's like, pow! Yes, they do. But the problem is that from an outside standpoint, the pictures are what you see. And this is the problem that a lot of people have when they think about becoming writers, is that they, you know, well, I've got to do great words. No, you have to tell the story. And sometimes telling the story means not words at all, letting the pictures handle it. But that's all right, because the story is what's important. I did a scene in a story with John Bolton once, Marauda the She-Wolf, where she's standing over this bed on which lies her beloved, who has just died, or who is dying, actually. And I wrote this page of dialogue, narrative copy that was full of brilliant allusions and metaphors about her resonating this moment with the death of her father years before, and how she's found love and lost it, and she feels ashamed that she wasn't able to save him, and that it's her fault that he's dying, and blah, 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 blah. And it was really nice stuff. And I'm looking at the page, and something's wrong. I know something's wrong. I can't quite put my finger on it. So I'm standing in the editor's office, and Frank Miller is there with me, and I said, look, Frank, read this page. Tell me what you think. And Frank reads the page, and he looks at me and says, Chris, it's good.
doesn't need the words.
It's really good. And I looked at him, and I looked at the page, and I said, you know, and threw out all the dialogue.
I figured that, yeah.
Because it didn't need it.
Yeah.
I mean, what I need, you know, Frank was saying that the words were really good, but by him saying that, I suddenly realized what he was saying was, you don't need them.
Well, the same thing goes for writers as for artists. Sometimes, and it's hard to do, sometimes you can fall in love with something you've written, you can fall in love with something you've drawn, but to be very honest, you have to say, no, it would be better, I wrote this beautifully, or I drew that beautifully, but the panel would be better without it. It doesn't need it.
I mean, the hardest thing to learn is that comics is the art of storytelling. And if there was an artist and I were having a discussion not so long ago, where there was a fight scene, and in the course of the fight scene, a character got a limb severed. And I was saying, why is this happening? And basically, the artist was saying, well, me and some other guys in my studio were sitting around at night, and we were thinking, it was late, and we thought, this would be a neat moment. And I said, okay, why? What do you mean, why? Well, what purpose does it serve in the story?
How does it carry the story forward?
If this happens, this is a major element in both the life of the person whose arm has been cut off and the life of the person who did the job. Not to mention all the people that this other character knows. How are they going to react to this? And if it just comes out of left field and happens, and no notice is taken of it else later on in the story, then it means nothing. And if it means nothing, why is it there? If notice is taken out of it in the rest of the story, that skews the whole story, in a whole different direction,
You know,
and changes everything.
The amazing thing about what you're saying, it really proves, we're not just talking about comic book writing, we're talking about writing.
Yes.
We're talking about any story, a classic. I mean, you could be talking about Edgar Allan Poe, you could be talking about Dumas. Shakespeare. Everything in the story has to mean something.
Right.
It has to lead to something. And Chris, I want to tell you something. Our time is just about up. But I think that you have proven, just by the things you've said now, and I hope the people watching this have been as fascinated by it as I have, but you have proven, I think, that we made a great choice when we asked you to come on a show called The Comic Book Greats. Thank you so much for being here, Chris.
Thank you, Stan. It was my pleasure.
Enjoyed every minute of it.
Me too.
Right.